Hello and welcome back to the Shoogly shed. This is part 2 on the wheels for the XJR. As you might be able to see, I have the rear one very temporarily mounted up here. I'll just fill you in if you didn't watch the last wheel episode. We got the front one done. Basically, the wheels that I bought are from Ducati GT1000 and they don't even in the slightest match up to the XJR1300 wheels. So, yeah, can of worms opened with regards to trying to make them fit. Got the front one done in the last episode. The rear one was going to be a bit more of a challenge. I'm going down the route of having a new spindle fabricated. I'm still basically trying to figure out where I'm going to do that, who's going to do it for me, yada yada yada. I have fabricated a very crude temporary solution which effectively is the original XJR axle. It's a hollow axle. What I've done is I have machined down a length of mild steel bar, pressed it into that axle super tight, effectively making that axle solid, then turned that spindle down to 25mm outside diameter, which is what the hub requires. So that gives me this, temporary solution. It runs nice and true and smooth, but the strength isn't all there. Although there is that center bar pressed through there, the actual XJR spindle wall is now like 0.5 of a mil thick. It was like 3mm thick, it's now 0.5, so I've taken quite a bit of meat off of it. But it basically means that I will be able to continue with sizing up the spacings and things for the back wheel here, and can cross the bridge when I come to it with regards to having a spindle made. The good thing about having a go at making this spindle on my lathe was that it did prove to me that my lathe isn't really capable of turning anything that length. This spindle has to be 340mm long, so like 34cm, and that basically maxes out the lathe bed that I have on my lathe. And when you're turning something that length, the far end of the piece, the furthest away from the chuck, it's really hard to get that accuracy, because the further away it is, the more kind of play or like loss of concentricity you get when it spins. Without all manners of stabilizing devices, it's just really not the lathe for the job, basically. But that's good, because it did prove to me that is the case, and I didn't waste a lot of time and money on expensive, spindle material trying to turn my own just to find out that I couldn't do it, or at least I couldn't do it accurately enough. Anyway, all that said, I've got this temporary measure in place which will allow me to continue with getting the spacings right. The rear wheel was always going to be the most complicated. It's got things like this, which are part of the chain alignment adjustment, like wheel tension adjustment. I'm going to have to space these, because these are 28mm, but they need to come down to 25mm internal diameter, so I've got an interesting bridge to cross there. Yeah, quite complicated things to do, but I'm sure we'll manage. And the first thing I'm going to do is basically figure out, well, how I'm going to go about this. This is the spindle that I turned. As you can see, it's got this big piece of mild steel just like pressed into it. Makes it nice and weighty and solid, but I've turned that down to 25mm. Fits nice and snug through the wheel there. It's not very neat. You lose quite a lot of the neatness towards like the outside, where I had it clamped in the chuck here, and it's a bit neater here, then it just starts to go to pot a little bit all the way back here. As I said, because it spins in the chuck, it just starts to wobble like that more. Imagine like, spinning a floppy tube around. It just starts to just go out of true ever so slightly, which is enough to basically lose your precision. Either way though, this will work for what I'm doing just now, which is basically figuring out all the different spacings I'm going to need and the adjustments I'm going to have to make to these wheel alignment adjustments. The other thing I've got to contend with is this, which is the cush drive, or the sprocket drive for the Ducati wheel here. This is actually off of a Monster, but they work the same. Essentially, other way about. This has studs that go into it, which then sit in those rubber holes there, and that holds your sprocket carrier. I needed to figure out that spacing, because obviously that takes up a proportion of the wheel as well. Yeah, there's a few things to figure out here, but getting that spindle turned was the first kind of step, so you know, I can start to figure things out now. What I need to do is put in spacers into these. These are 28mm diameter, inside diameter. I need to bring that down to 25mm diameter. So as you can see, these are too loose. So the real trick is putting in a spacer that won't move, because when I press in a spacer to these, when the whole spindle assembly comes together, it pulls everything together, and if this has any movement in it, as in it can, for example, press out or in slightly more, what that would do is bring everything out of alignment. So the way to fix that is basically by turning top hat spacers. So like I did for the front wheel, top hat spacers, they look like miniature top hats. Here's a top hat spacer there for you to have a look at. Effectively, I want to turn something down of this kind of, almost this kind of size and shape, just with a 25mm inside diameter and 28mm outside diameter, that can be pressed into this with a recess cut for the top hat to sit in as well. First things first, I want to try and cut a recess in this for my top hat to press into. Oh well. That was a waste of time. that's one of them done. Really chuffed with that result. That is flush as you like. That press fit was super snug. You have to bore it out slightly larger than you want, because when you press fit, kind of like with the front, the metal contracts, and to get that smooth, snug feeling with the spindle, that's basically the way to do it. The reason this is slightly longer, you'll find out in a minute, is this basically slots into the swing arm, and then this will take up the slack in the swing arm as well. That outside diameter is 28, inside 25, so that basically goes into the swing arm and completes that run of 25mm for the spindle. All I've got to do now is the other side. A little bit more complicated, this one. This is the one where the axle, the spindle, sorry, sits in it, and it's basically held still for tightening and loosening the spindle. So this is much less material to work with, so I'm gonna have to play my cards right here and make sure I get this absolutely bang on. If I take too much material off, job's a bogey. The two chain alignment adjuster things have now been finished. You saw me do that one, and I've just finished off this one. So this one was slimmer. I just basically couldn't take as much meat out of the existing piece for the top hat to press into, but we got there in the end. Just a bit more of a delicate job. So these two are going to go either side of the swing arm at the ends, and the sort of temporary axle should go all the way through both of them. So let's have a wee test fit. That's satisfying, isn't it? One wheel spinning on my temporary axle. It's like the slightest bit of play there, but it doesn't even have the nut on it yet, so it's not all been pulled together, and I haven't done centralising spacers. The sprocket carrier's got to go on this side first. I've got to get the chain alignment right, and then the disc alignment. So, you know, certainly more bridges to cross, but the first stages here are done. It's nice to have that wheel mounted up and spinning completely silently. Beautiful. Effectively, that's the back wheel mounted up this way, kind of vertically, if that makes sense. It still can slide horizontally, but I kind of need it to be like that right now while I figure out the spacing of everything. Spacing of, for example, the sprocket carrier, and the spacing of the rear disc brake. What I need to do next to progress with that is get myself a set of tyres. And I have ordered a set. They're on their way. Hopefully they'll be here in the next couple of days, so I will bring you back when they're here. We'll chuck them on the wheels and we'll continue with, like I say, squaring up this back wheel. I've also got that spacer to turn at the front. Just the matching one from last time. But as far as this episode goes, I'm going to call it there. That was more complicated than I thought it was going to be, but I guess I didn't think it was going to be easy, so, you know, rough with the smooth and all that. I'm pretty pleased with how those top hat spacers turned out. They're super flush, and you know, you wouldn't really know they were there from the outside of the bike, so that's a good result from my part, and I'm pretty pleased that I managed to, you know, yet again turn out a couple of precision parts from my little lathe that's, you know, 80 odd years old now, so that's, yeah, satisfying. Anyway, as usual, please do give me a like, leave me a comment, and subscribe to the Shoogly Shed channel, and I will hopefully see you next time where we'll be getting some shoes on this thing. Cheerio, goodbye.